Before you listen to my story, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about the people in your life you trust the most, the ones you would give anything for, the ones whose happiness is fundamentally tied to your own. Now, I want you to imagine them looking you in the eye, smiling, while simultaneously planning your demise. That's what happened to me. My daughter, my only child, Jessica, and her insufferable husband, Mark, paid for a one-way trip to Hawaii for my 70th birthday. They told me it was a gift, a chance to live out my golden years in paradise, a chance to rest. What they really meant was that it was a chance for me to die thousands of miles away so they could get their hands on my house and my money. They thought they were clever. They thought they were sending an old, frail man to his final resting place. But they made one catastrophic miscalculation. They mistook my kindness for weakness, my patience for senility, and my generosity for an endless, unconditional resource. They didn't know who I really was, what I was capable of, or the simple, unbending truth of the universe. Actions have consequences. They sent me away to inherit everything. And in the end, they did. They inherited the exact and total sum of what they deserved, a crushing, public, and irreversible nothing. And I was there to watch it all unfold. So if you're watching from somewhere with entitled family members of your own, grab some popcorn, subscribe to the channel, and let me tell you how I turned their Hawaiian dream into their worst nightmare. 4 or 5 years since my beloved Martha passed, my life had settled into a quiet rhythm. I live in the house we built together, a sprawling 2-story colonial that was far too big for one man. But every corner held a memory. Every creak in the floorboards was a whisper from a happier time. I spent my days gardening, reading, and managing the investments Martha had so brilliantly set up for us decades ago. I was a retired factory foreman, a simple man on the surface, and I let people believe that. It was easier. Martha had been the financial genius, a wealth manager who saw the future in ways I never could. Thanks to her, my quiet retirement was underpinned by a level of financial security my daughter and her husband could scarcely comprehend. They just saw Dad, the lonely old man in the big house with a decent pension. They saw a resource. Jessica had always been the apple of my eye, but marrying Mark changed her. He was a man who wore his ambition like a cheap suit, flashy, ill-fitting, and obvious to everyone but the person wearing it. He was a mid-level manager at some tech startup, always talking about disruption and synergy, but the only thing he ever seemed to disrupt was my bank account. They lived a life far beyond their means. The leased luxury cars, the designer clothes, the country club membership they couldn't really afford. I subsidized it all. A loan for a down payment on a condo they couldn't get a mortgage for. A monthly allowance to help with bills, which I knew went straight to lavish dinners and weekend getaways. I did it because I loved Jessica, and I held on to the foolish hope that she would one day see Mark for the parasite he was. I paid for her happiness, or at least the illusion of it. The hint started subtly. "Dad, this house is so much work for you," Jessica would say, her eyes scanning the crown molding. "You should be relaxing, not worrying about mowing this huge lawn." Mark was more direct. "You know, Frank," he'd say, draping an arm over my shoulder, "the property values in this neighborhood are skyrocketing. This place is a gold mine. You're sitting on a fortune." They weren't concerned for my well-being. They were appraising their inheritance. Every visit felt less like a family gathering and more like an inspection. They'd point out phantom cracks in the foundation or talk about how dated the kitchen was, all under the guise of caring for my safety and comfort. In reality, they were mentally renovating the house they already considered theirs. The breaking point, the moment the scales didn't just fall from my eyes, but were shattered into a million pieces, was my 70th birthday party. They insisted on throwing me a big bash at the house. It was mostly their friends, a collection of vapid, social climbing couples who looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. I sat in my own armchair, a party hat perched awkwardly on my head, as they toasted to my health with champagne I had paid for. Then came the big gift. Jessica presented me with a large, glossy envelope. "We wanted to do something really special for you, Daddy," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured emotion. "You've worked so hard your whole life. You deserve to be in paradise. I opened it. Inside was a flight itinerary, a first-class ticket to Honolulu, Hawaii, and a brochure for a long-term luxury residential community there. "It's a one-way ticket," Mark announced proudly to the room. "We didn't want to put a time limit on your dream. You can stay a week, a month, or forever. It's your time now." The room erupted in applause. Their friends praised their generosity. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. A one-way ticket. It felt less like a gift and more like a banishment. But I smiled. I thanked them. I played the part of the grateful father. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up the remnants of their manufactured celebration, I went to take a bag of trash out to the garage. The door to the kitchen was slightly ajar, and I heard their voices, low and conspiratorial. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, and listened. "He bought it, hook, line, and sinker," Mark chuckled. "The live your dream" speech was a nice touch, babe. Very convincing. Jessica's voice, my daughter's voice, replied, "He's getting so frail, Mark. It's for the best. The climate will be good for him. And honestly, we can't keep this up. The club fees are going up again next month. Once he's settled, we can get the house on the market." Then came the words that stopped my heart. "And let's be realistic," Mark said, his voice a cold, pragmatic whisper. "With his heart condition and the stress of a big move, the old man will be lucky to last 6 months. The estate should clear probate just in time for us to buy that place in the city for Christmas." I leaned against the wall, the breath knocked out of me. It wasn't just greed. It was a cold, calculated death sentence. They weren't sending me to paradise. They were sending me to a waiting room, hoping my ticket would be punched sooner rather than later. They were shipping their problem off to die so they could cash in the ticket. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, in the chair Martha had always loved, and let the pain wash over me. It was a physical ache, a deep, hollow chasm where my love for my daughter used to be. Every memory of her childhood, teaching her to ride a bike, holding her hand on the first day of school, walking her down the aisle, was now tainted, overlaid with the image of her smug face as she handed me my exile papers. The tears came first, hot and bitter. Tears of grief for a daughter I had just lost, even though she was still breathing. But as the sun began to cast long, gray shadows across the living room, the grief began to cool. It hardened. It solidified into something else entirely. A cold, clear, and unshakable resolve. They had mistaken my love for a weakness to be exploited. They had seen my generosity not as a gift, but as an obligation. They thought I was a doddering old fool, a final obstacle on their path to a life of unearned luxury. Enough was enough. The factory foreman who had managed 100 rough-and-tumble workers for 30 years, the man who had negotiated union contracts and faced down corporate bullies, that man was still there. He had just been dormant. As I watched the dawn break, a new plan began to form in my mind. It was intricate, it was precise, and it was utterly ruthless. They wanted me to go to Hawaii. Fine, I would go. But the person who returned would not be the man they thought they knew. And the world they came home to would be one of their own making, a barren landscape of consequences. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the part of the excited, slightly confused old man to perfection. I let Jessica help me pack, feigning ignorance about what to bring. I listened patiently as Mark explained, with condescending simplicity, how to use a smartphone to call them. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so convinced of their intellectual superiority, that they never saw the glint in my eye. They never questioned my sudden agreeableness. While they were busy picking out paint swatches for their new living room, I was making moves. My first call was to Arthur Davison, my lawyer for the past 40 years, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of my financial situation. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I need to make some immediate and drastic changes to my estate. Consider it a complete teardown and rebuild." I met him the next day at his downtown office, a place of old leather and quiet competence. I laid out the entire sordid story, from the years of financial bleeding to the overheard conversation in the kitchen. Arthur, a man not easily shocked, simply removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Frank," he said, "I'm not just your lawyer. I'm your friend. What do you want to do? I want to create a lesson, I replied. A lesson in cause and effect. I want them to have exactly what they've earned. The plan we devised was simple in its elegance and brutal in its execution. First, the house. It was held in a revocable trust, with Jessica as the sole beneficiary. With a few strokes of a pen, I changed the beneficiary to the Martha H. Reynolds Foundation for Women's Shelters, a charity I had established in my wife's name years ago, which I funded anonymously. The house, their grand prize, was now legally and irrevocably out of their reach. Second, the will. We drafted a new one from scratch. Jessica and Mark were explicitly disinherited. Arthur insisted we include a specific clause. For reasons of their profound and demonstrated lack of character and their calculated and malicious actions, I intentionally leave nothing from my estate to my daughter, Jessica Reynolds Thompson, or her husband, Mark Thompson. They have received their inheritance in full during my lifetime. There would be no room for them to contest it. Third, the finances. This was the part one could execute myself. I went online and methodically, dispassionately, severed every financial tie. The generous monthly transfer I sent to their account, canceled, effective immediately. The high-limit credit card I had given them for emergencies, which they used for spa days and golf weekends, canceled. The brokerage account I had set up for Jessica as a wedding gift, which I still managed and funded. I liquidated the positions and had a cashier's check for the full amount mailed to Arthur's office to be deposited into the foundation's account. And finally, the car. The shiny, new SUV Mark was so proud of, the one he used to ferry his friends to the country club. I had bought it for them, but the title and registration were still, prudently, in my name. I made a call to a repossession company and scheduled a pickup for 3 days after my departure. The final piece of the puzzle was the trap. I wrote them a heartfelt, handwritten note. Jessica and Mark, it read, "Please, while I'm gone, make yourselves at home. The house is too empty without family in it. Look after the place for me. All my love, Dad." I left it on the kitchen counter, next to a spare set of keys. I was inviting the wolves into the fold, encouraging them to get comfortable in a house they no longer had any claim to. I wanted them to move their things in, to change the curtains, to truly believe they had won. The fall would be so much harder from a greater height. The day of my flight was a cinematic masterpiece of their own creation. Jessica cried crocodile tears at the security gate, hugging me tightly. "We'll miss you so much, Daddy," she whispered. Mark clapped me on the back, a wide, predatory grin on his face. "You deserve this, Frank. Send us a postcard." I hugged my daughter back, feeling nothing but a cold, empty space where a father's love should be. "You take care of yourselves," I said, meeting both their eyes. "And don't worry about a thing." As I walked toward the gate, I didn't look back. I knew they would be watching, their faces alight with triumph, already mentally calculating the commission on the sale of my house. They thought they were watching me walk out of their lives. In reality, they were watching their entire future walk away. But I didn't get on the plane to Honolulu. My ticket was real, a necessary prop in this theater of cruelty. But my actual destination was a quiet, comfortable hotel in San Diego, a short flight away. I had booked a suite under a false name, paid for in cash. This would be my command center. I had a new phone, a new laptop, and a direct feed to the security cameras I had installed in my house years ago after a minor break-in. They had no idea they existed. From my hotel room, overlooking the Pacific, I had a front row seat to the implosion of their lives. The first 24 hours were quiet. They followed my script perfectly. The cameras showed them arriving at the house with suitcases, laughing and toasting with a bottle of my best scotch. They walked through the rooms, Mark pointing at walls he wanted to knock down, Jessica measuring windows for new drapes. They were conquerors claiming their territory. The unraveling began on day 3. It was the first of the month. My usual transfer to their account did not arrive. My first alert was a text from Jessica around noon. "Hey, Dad. Hope you're settling in. Just a heads up, the transfer didn't come through. Probably just a glitch. Love you." I read it and deleted it. By evening, the text became more frantic. "Dad, are you getting these?" I tried to pay for groceries and the card was declined. It was really embarrassing. "Can you please call the bank?" I ordered room service and watched a movie. The next day, the real fireworks started. Mark, according to his irate texts, had tried to pay for a round of golf at the country club, and his card was also declined. Frank, this is unacceptable. Our membership is at risk. Whatever is going on with the bank, you need to fix it. Now, they still thought it was a logistical error. They were so steeped in their entitlement that the idea I had intentionally cut them off was beyond their comprehension. The crown jewel of my plan was executed on the morning of day 4. My security cameras showed Mark's precious SUV parked in the driveway. At precisely 9 a.m., a tow truck from the repossession company quietly backed up to it. I watched, mesmerized, as a man efficiently hooked it up. Jessica ran out of the house in her bathrobe, screaming. Mark followed, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. He argued with the driver, who calmly showed him the paperwork, my name clearly visible as the registered owner. The tow truck pulled away, taking with it the last major symbol of their fraudulent lifestyle. The phone call started then, a relentless barrage of rage and confusion. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to them later, a grim satisfaction settling over me. Jessica's tearful pleading, Mark's sputtering threats of legal action. They were like children whose toys had been taken away, incapable of understanding why. For a week, I let them marinate in their panic and confusion. They were trapped in a house with no money, no car, and mounting bills. The life they had built on my foundation was crumbling, and they had no idea why. The final act was set in motion by Arthur. He dispatched a process server to the house. I watched on my laptop as a stern-looking man in a suit walked up my front path and handed a thick envelope to Jessica. It was a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice issued by the new legal owner of the property, the Martha H. Reynolds Foundation for Women's Shelters. The notice informed them that their presence constituted trespassing and that if they were not gone by the specified date, authorities would be called to remove them. This was the blow they could not comprehend. Their brains short-circuited. The voicemails devolved into pure, incoherent panic. This was my cue. It was time to go home. I flew back not as a frail old man, but as the architect of their ruin. I wore a new, sharply tailored suit Arthur had helped me pick out. I felt powerful, in control for the first time in years. I took a taxi from the airport and arrived at my house in the late afternoon. The scene was exactly as I had pictured it. The lawn was overgrown, trash cans were overflowing, and a pile of their belongings was accumulating on the porch. Through the window, I could see them arguing, their faces pale and strained. I walked up the path, took out my own set of keys, and unlocked the front door. The sound of the key in the lock made them both freeze. They turned and stared at me, as if they were seeing a ghost. Jessica's jaw dropped. Mark's face cycled through confusion, then anger, then a flicker of fear. "Dad," Jessica stammered. "What? What are you doing here?" "I thought you were in Hawaii. I decided to cut my trip short," I said, my voice calm and even. I walked past them into the living room, my living room, and surveyed the mess. "It seems I've come back to find squatters in my house." Mark found his voice first. It was full of bluster and false bravado. "What the hell is this, Frank? What's this eviction notice? You can't kick us out. This is our house." I turned to him slowly. "That's where you're mistaken, Mark. This has never been your house. This is my house. And as of 2 weeks ago, it is the property of a charitable foundation." "You are trespassing." Jessica started to cry. "Daddy, please, what's going on?" "The money stopped. The car is gone. We've been so worried." "Worried?" I let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. "Were you worried on the night of my birthday party? When you stood right here in this kitchen and planned my life expectancy? Tell me, Jessica, what was the timeline you agreed on? 6 months? Was that how long you thought it would take for the old man to die, so you could sell my house?" The color drained from their faces. The shock of hearing their own words repeated back to them was absolute. They were caught, stripped bare of all their lies and manipulations. We didn't mean it like that," Jessica whimpered. "You didn't mean it like that?" I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "You sent me away with a one-way ticket, hoping I would die alone on an island so you could liquidate my life. You saw me not as a father, but as a bank account with a heartbeat. You danced in my house, planning its sale, while you thought I was thousands of miles away. But I wasn't in Hawaii. I was in a hotel room in San Diego, watching you. I watched you move in. I watched your car get declined. I watched your car get towed. I watched your entire pathetic, parasitic world collapse under the weight of its own greed. I let the words hang in the air. Mark, stripped of his arrogance, just stared at the floor. Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably. Everything you thought you were entitled to is gone. I continued, my voice like ice. The house is gone. The trust fund is gone. The monthly allowance is gone. The will has been rewritten. You have been excised from my life as cleanly as a surgeon removes a tumor. You wanted my inheritance? You had it. Every dollar I ever gave you, every bill I ever paid, that was your inheritance. There is no more. I walked to the door and opened it. The eviction notice gives you 30 days. I'm feeling generous. I'll give you until the end of the week. Get your things and get out of my life. They left 3 days later, not with a moving truck, but with their belongings stuffed into trash bags in the back of a beat-up sedan belonging to one of their friends that didn't look at me as they left. There was nothing left to say. I watched them drive away, not with hatred, but with a profound and weary sense of peace. The cancer had been removed. In the months that followed, I sold the house. It held too many ghosts. I gave a significant portion of the proceeds to Martha's Foundation and used the rest to buy a beautiful, modest condominium overlooking the ocean. In San Diego, I finally took that trip to Hawaii, but on my own terms. I stayed for a month, walking the beaches, feeling the sun on my face, and truly resting for the first time in years. I learned through Arthur that Jessica and Mark divorced within a year. Their relationship, built on a foundation of shared greed, couldn't survive the sudden poverty. Last I heard, she was working as a waitress, and he was facing legal trouble for some shady business dealings. They had inherited nothing but the consequences of their own choices. And so, the lesson is this: be careful what you wish for, and be even more careful who you underestimate. Kindness is not a weakness, and love is not a license for disrespect. People will show you who they really are. It is your job to believe them the first time. They wanted me gone so they could have my house. Now, they are gone, and I have a home. And that, my friends, is what you call poetic justice. Thank you for listening to my story. Let me know in the comments what you would have done, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of life and the lessons it teaches us.